Hello, we're live with Dan
We
Shafer
are
from
live.
Recombobulation Area. And there's a lot of, have you done quite a bit of recombobulating this week or what?
It's been a discombobulating week, I must say. It has been. I'm trying my best to recombobulate, but my goodness, what a week. What a week. We got to start with our favorite soon to be former assembly speaker, don't we?
Yes.
The
Robin
big
Voss. How
announcement.
long have you been anticipating and waiting for this moment?
I have been thinking about this day for yesterday for a long time. A long time.
How does it feel?
It is my initial reaction was just kind of jubilation. And,
Yeah.
I think we had talked about this offline a little bit here and there, but the rumors that Voss was heading towards retiring were getting louder than ever.
Hmm.
I feel like the last couple cycles around this time, there had been some of those similar rumors where it had been, hey, maybe Robin Voss is going to retire at the end of this term. Maybe he's not going to do this. Maybe he's going to step over into something else, whatever. Um, and it never really happened, of course. But now the rumors over the past few months um, had really amped up, and but I also didn't want to be like the Charlie Brown with the football here,
Right.
and end up looking silly because I had many people telling me that he was going to be retiring, and this has
Well,
been the chattering class talk for months now.
I always
Um,
take any rumors about him too with a grain of salt because
yeah,
he's kind of a he has a small circle or seems to that he keeps pretty close. And there's so I think even Republicans sometimes don't really know his moves or what he's going to do. So it's like, even rumors, it's like, well, where'd you hear that from? Do you really know? Or
right.
I don't even know if people truly knew what was going to happen until he actually announced it.
Yeah, and I was of the mindset it was just like I don't believe it until it happens, and then even then I'm not sure. Like I had to, just like it's like when you see one of those fake reports flying around on social media or whatever. It's just like I need to check every possible source, and I was even watching it live on
Yeah.
Wisconsin Eye when
Yeah.
he was right at the beginning of the session there because I was kind of waiting for how they would start the session with Gale's Law and postpartum Medicaid extension anyway,
Hmm.
and how they might, approach that or have a quick vote or whatever it might be. But then all of a sudden they're turning to, you know, Voss, who typically speaks at the very end of these sessions and likes to give himself the last word. And the fact that they just kind of, had a couple administrative things to start out, and then we're going right to Voss. And then, obviously from the people in the room, you could see what happened. There's been some videos on social media of him, kind of with his staff and preparing to speak before he took the mic there. Um, but a remarkable moment, and I think as we look at Tony Evers in his final year of his term, I think Robin Voss has been perhaps the most consequential politician in the state of Wisconsin for the past generation, and like to be clear, for the worse consequential politician, but he's been so unbelievably important throughout his time as Assembly Speaker, the longest serving Assembly Speaker in state history, and it's really something to see that run come to an end.
Yeah, and I was watching live too. I'm glad I moved the camera because at first when he started talking, it was behind the banner, and I was like, cut to another shot. We got to see what's going on.
Yeah,
Um, and they did. But, he was quite emotional.
yeah,
And this is obviously, the thing about Voss the whole Voss thing is very inside baseball. He's actually not the type of politician who's like always out front, wants to make all the headlines and all the noise. He'll do interviews with your typical political, weekly kind of stuff. But he really like serves from behind. He's like the puppet master, right? He
yeah.
does a lot of his work kind of behind the scenes, and like you said, a lot of it is, it can't be understated how impactful it has been, and to see him up there, emotional, it does just go to show how much he loved this job and loves
Hmm.
this job, and to be clear, he's still gonna be around until next year when the new
Yep.
class gets sworn in, so hopefully he doesn't go on, a spree of, well, may as well get some stuff done on here. Um, but yeah, it all his speech was very much, I think, what I kind of figured it would be. He has always loved this. He's always told people he doesn't have higher aspirations. He doesn't wanna run for
Mhm.
governor or senate or anything like that. And it seems like he's done, and he had a hard time with that. Were you surprised to see him emotional?
A little bit, yeah. But I think, he also talked about, like, the health scare that he had
Yeah,
last year too, and I think that can, give people a different kind of perspective when they go through an experience like that, and as much as I disagree with basically everything Farben Voss has done as Assembly Speaker and the approach he's taken, like, I do have sympathy for him, dealing with a health scare like that, and so that gives people a different kind of perspective, and I think he talked about that as a top contributing reason why he's headed towards retirement. And he talked about this is a very stressful job, and I need to have a little bit less stress in my life going forward. And so I think that certainly made the experience of that personal in a
mhm,
way, right? Um, and so there was that element of it too. Um, But I think there were also a number of things that he said during that speech that were just maddening to me,
yes.
and
He
talking
got
about
some digs in for sure.
he got some digs in, but he was talking about how, just the respect that he had for this legislative body and all of that. And he just throughout his whole
Honoring
time there,
democracy,
honoring democracy, he honoring the will of the voters, and it's just like he has ripped this place apart by the seams. He has not honored, any election victories from his adversaries. He's almost governed as if the opposition shouldn't exist. He's tried to have like almost a one party rule in Wisconsin because of the gerrymandering, because of the courts, because of so many other things that have been a factor there. And I think there is that, just that dichotomy between the way he seems to think of himself versus the reality of the havoc he has wrought in
for sure.
Wisconsin as well.
And for people who, like, might not well, most people probably don't know as much as you know, about him, like, how can you explain, like, how he came to be, how he affected Walker and that administration, and, like, how did he have so much power?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it always goes back to the maps. And the fact that, they passed those maps in, 2012 or whatever it was. He becomes speaker in 2013. And I think that those maps have always given him a skeleton key to be able to kind of unlock whatever he wanted and still hold all the cards in state politics. And so he was, under Walker, he was the hard charging legislative ally to get so many of Walker's, initiatives done. Act 10, right to work, Foxconn. I mean, Foxconn is in Voss's district.
Mhm.
That's a point that people tend to overlook from time to time too. So there was all those things from the first term, but I feel like he really became, in so many ways, the most powerful politician in the state after Walker, after Evers was elected, and was just this staunch obstructionist. And I think, you go from the Walker era, uh, where Republicans had the trifecta control and to just do really whatever they wanted through that whole time to, okay, Wisconsin chose something different. Are we going to recognize that at all? Nope, because he's still got the maps. He's still got these backstops available to him. And I think, for the past 8 years now in divided government in Wisconsin, Voss has been, he's for those of us who follow politics on a day to day, he's just everywhere all the time. And he's just been the dominant force in Wisconsin politics. And I know he likes to think of himself as this shadow governor, and the so many folks on the right have adopted that moniker from that. There was a Politico story a few years ago that
Mhm.
used that in the headline. Um, but I don't think he's ever actually reflected the will of the people in Wisconsin. I took a look back at the Marquette University Law School polls that has polled his favorability since 2019, kind of going back to that time when he became the top Republican in the state. And his favorability has always been really bad. It's never been higher than I think like 17%. And you still have like basically half of the state not having an opinion of him, not really knowing who he is, which
I
always
know, it is crazy to me that most
puts
people
things
actually
into
don't even know who
perspective
he
that no
is.
people don't know who the assembly speaker is. But
Yeah,
that's how modern politics works in so many ways.
yeah,
Um, but even as more and more people became familiar with him, his that favorability number stayed very low. And I don't think, so many these issues that had majority bipartisan support, and we just saw it this week with the postpartum Medicaid extension bill, that he just stood in the way of. And through the obstruction, through just his approach in leadership and just being so unbelievably dismissive of the other side, like we could go on and on and on.
yeah. Well, and that's what's been so frustrating to watch is these votes that have or these policies that are widely supported by citizens, but also many Republicans, including most of his own caucus, they're saying they're pushing him on and he's not moving. That is not the will of the people. If you are just like blocking a vote because it doesn't align with your philosophy, well, that's not really what the job is. And he abused that power all the time.
Hmm.
But he also you know, he also has a lot of haters on the right because
Hmm.
he's very frustrating, but he's not MAGA. They call him a rhino.
Right.
What is, so they think that they're all happy he's gonna be gone. Do you think they're gonna maybe be missing him when he is gone?
I mean, probably because he was such an effective uh, leader at consolidating the votes within his caucus, consolidating power over and over again to give himself more and more control over the process. And you're right, he had, I think it was like the election denial stuff that lost him some of the support on the right. But I also think he tried to play both sides and it didn't work. Like
Sure.
he's the one who launched the Gableman investigation. He's the one who was calling committee hearings in the days after that November 2020 election to call into question these results. So he was both fueling the election deniers and standing against them. He was trying to have it both ways the whole time. And, the folks that, backed the primary challenge against him and whatever else
Mhm.
happened in the years since, like that's his doing. That's the monster that he created coming back to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also talk about how, you look at the Republicans bench and it's pretty shallow. And
Right.
that is also, I think, yeah, he consolidated all his power and made all these procedural changes to his own benefit while he was there. But at what cost? I think, at some point, it's gonna catch up with them, that it was I mean, he basically gave them a really high handicap, right? And they never really
Yeah.
learned how to play the game the right way. So now that he's gonna be gone and their handicap is gone, it's like, "Okay, now you gotta play by the rules," and everybody has both hands and the blindfold off, so what are you gonna do?
Right. And I think he also never really minded being the guy who would um, take the criticism from the left, take the criticism or whatever. I think he kind of reveled in it to
He
a
loved
certain
it. I think
degree.
he kinda loved being the villain.
Yeah. And so that shielded a lot of the other folks within his caucus where he's, standing against Medicaid expansion, universal background checks, all of funding for childcare, uh, so many different things over the years that he has been kind of the figurehead for and has shielded a lot of the people in the rest of his caucus from really taking accountability on so many of these measures over the years. And now, if he's and like I've heard he's going to be active in the Republican Assembly Campaign Committee. So I think he's still going to be pulling the strings on
Which is
that for the next few
where a lot
months,
of
which is
actually, that's where a
really
lot of his
consequential.
power is that
Yeah.
isn't as well documented or known because it's all kind of just, something everybody knows but isn't really talked about because he allegedly just kind of he really manages the election strategy and reelection strategy for almost
Yeah.
every Republican in the assembly and all of that, which is, I think, a big reason that even when they say they disagree with him, they won't actually hold him accountable because he's kinda, dangling the carrot over here and handling everything for them on the back end for their
Right.
reelection.
Right, and obviously the maps helped with that, but I think as we saw in the last election when we finally had these fairer maps that were more reflective of where Wisconsin actually is, like he was still able to hold the assembly majority, and I think in the Senate, they didn't have the full Senate up, so it wasn't a chance really realistic opportunity to flip the Senate, but you know Democrats went 5 for 5 in their competitive races in the Senate, and Republicans did much better in the Assembly. I think they had what was it 4 or 5 um, Republicans won in districts that Kamala Harris carried. Like,
Mhm.
he knew where to steer the funds for Todd Novak in particular, who has won close election after close election after close election for more than a decade now, supporting Bob Donovan, supporting Jesse Rodriguez, a number of these close races that he knew how to deploy the resources and had tons of money coming in from Uline and Hendricks and all of the big Republican donors that have backed him all the way. And so I think I would still like people even saying like that Democrats have a better chance to flip the assembly. He's still going to be working to do that,
Mhm.
working to keep the assembly. And like, I still think there's a good chance that Republicans stay in the majority because of some of the strong incumbents, because of Voss is going to be pushing things on that end too.
Well, because all of those really close races also get a lot of financial help from a third party kind of dark money group called Jobs First,
Mm,
which he may or may not be associated with, right?
right. Right. And his now wife, who is a former state representative, Michelle Lichens Voss, she is the top fundraiser for Jobs First Wisconsin. And, we saw just like the last 24 hours before his speech really crystallized so much about the Voss experience in a lot of
Yep.
ways. Like he was obstructing this bill that had majority support even within his caucus, and then left the Capitol mid-session to go to a fundraiser held by the Jobs First Coalition, which is the top fundraiser is his now wife. Like that is just you see there, that's who he serves, right? That's who
Mhm.
he works for. He's working for the donor class. He's working for the corporate interests. He's working for that end, and he has served them well in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I mean, it is all related because you look at some of those really key districts that they've been protecting, and I had the numbers, I don't have it in front of me now, but if you look at, like, Rodriguez, Donovan, Novak, and you add up the amount that they've gotten just from Boss himself, Republican Assembly Campaign Committee, and Jobs First, I mean,
hmm
it's in the millions. Like, it's
It's
a ton
yeah,
of money.
it's
So,
such a racket. Yeah.
it is all flowing to them, and it is not a coincidence that those vulnerable seats happen to be the ones behind the podium at the end of that very late night the other night
Yeah.
saying, "We got this done. We got this over the finish line." And I don't know if that's really because they really were pushing for it and they were scared they weren't gonna get reelected and they really were pissed. I do think some of them probably were pissed.
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt
Um,
that many of them were. Yeah. But
yeah,
it
because it could like this that was always what was confusing to me about him not allowing a vote on the postpartum in particular this whole time, is because all of the vulnerable Republicans did vocally support it, and I'm like, it seems like that would be a good campaign strategy on their side to have them have that vote and go champion that they push this, which, of course, that narrative is already unfolded on the right, that they are the
mhm.
ones who, like, championed this and made it happen, and it's gonna be all over, the election efforts, which is fine. We'll just, if they need that, whatever. We'll just it's more important that it was
It
passed.
yeah. Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I don't know.
So you were let's talk about that bill then, since you brought it up and how that day unfolded. So you were at the Capitol for much of the day,
Mhm.
and you recorded a terrific video in your garage when you returned home that night when you found out that they were going to
I
actually
know, I
pass
was
these
so
bills.
mad I actually
Yeah.
I got a note from a staffer when I was, like, passing Waukesha or something, and he was like,
Yeah.
"Turn on this eye," and I'm like, "I shouldn't have done this on the interstate," but I just, like I have a little icon on my home screen, so I pulled it up and I
Yeah.
saw that they were I'm like, "God damn it, I waited around for so long, and then I leave and this happens."
Yeah.
But, yeah, I got there early afternoon when, the floor session was going on, and that was still Republicans were attempting to go through their votes, and the Democrats were all I got there and usually the floor session days are very boring, right? No offense to, like, all the political people. They're just, like, very just procedural and kind of boring. Um, but I
Outside
got
of
there
like
and
the highlight bills, there will be the highlight
immediate
bills that everybody wants to talk about. But like a lot of the time, it is just like very kind of perfunctory
yeah, they say all this
government
weird
norms. Yes.
jargon language. They have to do these certain it's very, like, you have to stand up and say certain things, and you only have a couple minutes, but immediately I got there and the vibes were like reality show chaos behind the scenes. I mean,
Mhm.
staffers were, like, running and people were, like, yelling and they were coming in and out of doors. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Because Democrats had, and to leader Greta's point, or to her credit, they pulled a move to basically say, like, F it. We are going to get this done. We are going to obstruct as much as we can. We are in the minority. And so all we can do right now is like make this process as painful as possible for them. So we are
Hmm.
going to take postpartum Medicaid and Gale's Law, and every bill they try to put up when it comes to Democrats, we are going to try and add those two bills as amendments. And
Hmm.
of course, if the amendment isn't, if it's like doesn't really relate, they were starting to get mad, whatever that word is, because they were like, that's not, you can't do that.
Germane to I
Germane,
think it's,
yes.
yeah.
But they kept doing it, and Democrats would use their 2 minutes to be very vocal about how this was ridiculous. And I was so proud to see them fight like that, because I, am friendly with many of the Democrats, and I love them, but they are rule followers. Like, all the time, I'm like, "Guys, come on." Like, get, and they were just, I was so proud. They were fighting. That was, like, very out of the norm for them to do that, and it was, like, very cool to watch, but then, and so I was, like, doing interviews with different members. I'm like, "What's going on?" And they were just, I mean, it was so great because they didn't have their, like, careful talking points. They were just
Right.
very candid about what was going on, and,
There's a
yeah.
lesson there.
What?
There's a lesson there.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and then after a while, Republicans were so mad that this was happening that they called a recess and went to caucus for hours,
Yeah.
um, and then, yeah, we were all sitting around wondering, like, when they were gonna come back, and I was actually standing, like, right outside of the assembly chamber, outside of Voss's office, and I'm, like, looking down at my phone, and I look up, and he's just, like, walking around the corner, and I just was, like, and I happened to be recording, and I was like, Speaker Voss, are you gonna put the votes up for a vote?" And he goes, Which votes?" And I said, "Postpartum and Gale's Law," and he goes, "Ugh," like, literally scoffed in disgust, and then, because I had heard they were leaving for a fundraiser, so then a couple minutes later, he comes back out with his coat on. This is at, like, 5 p.m., and I was like, "Can I just ask you a couple questions?" And he said, "No," and I was just like, "Okay, have fun at your fundraiser." And then,
And then this is when I started getting a million texts from people on Assembly Democrat connected people. Yeah.
yeah, because it was really crazy. They were all the Democrats were like, trying to figure out if this was, like, legal or not to leave while the session was still in session to go fundraise, and it's so funny because that's who Democrats are. They're like, "Well, is it legal? Is it technical?" And they're trying to figure
Right.
out the
Right.
nuance of it, and I'm like, if the roles were reversed, m Republicans would just make the narrative and go with it and hammer it home, but
100%.
Democrats are just so careful about not wanting to, like, say the wrong thing.
100%.
Whether it was legal or illegal, it doesn't matter. It is crazy that these 2 very important laws that were gonna save Wisconsin women's lives were holding everything up, and his whole entire chamber was there in session, and he just took a bunch of people and left to go to a party.
A party held by his fundraiser wife.
Yeah, so
Pretty
then,
crazy.
and it was at the Madison Club,
At the
which is a
Madison Club.
members
Yeah.
only club, and Dev Andraka, who is a Democratic representative, she's like, "Well, I'm a member." And she's like, "I'm gonna go over. I'm just gonna get a beer." So she goes over and she went with, a couple reporters, and
That's a
that's
good Devin Draka impression, by the way.
yeah, she was just like, it was like everything was just so crazy. She's like, "I'm going." And,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, they went, and she said they went and, like, saw all the jobs first people, and she said hi, and then they went and got a beer, and then that was the picture that you saw
Yeah.
where, the 2 reporters had approached Voss and Tyler August, um, and were
Yeah.
trying to ask them what they were doing there, and they were, making up their own stuff about why they were
Yeah,
there.
they're trying to say that it was. I saw Baylor Spears from the Wisconsin Examiner, who was one of the reporters in that photo, had something in her story about what happened that day, and just Voss trying to say, "Oh, this is a normal way to behave.
Mhm.
This is totally nothing wrong with this." And it was just it was so absurd. And I think, but I do have to. I got to hand it to Greta Neubauer and Assembly Democrats for going absolutely all out on this and tying postpartum Medicaid and Gale's Law to every bill that they had on the floor session calendar, because those two bills were not on the floor session calendar.
Well, that is the thing. Them doing that and pushing those together and pushing that and, like, doing that Hail Mary is what made this happen.
Yes.
Like, and in the press conference later when Snyder was talking about how, like, "We were gonna put them up. I told them to trust me, and they almost derailed it," because apparently that pissed him off more, which good. But he was like, "They almost derailed it," and he seemed so mad, and it's like, "No, what do you mean trust you? You hadn't shown any good faith that this was gonna happen, and they weren't on the schedule, and we were at the end of the
Right.
line."
Right. And Snyder in particular I don't doubt that he actually legitimately wanted this bill passed. He
Totally.
was very much for it the whole time. He was one of the first people to introduce it. I believe he even did a press conference like with State Representative Robin Vining, a Democrat, to talk about this in the early goings of the session. Um, but Voss has been the one opposed to this. Voss has been the reason this has not been passed, making it so that Wisconsin was one of the only two states that did not have this type of health coverage available for new moms. And it was singularly his reason. And I think, he so often talked about he's opposed to, any kind of expansion of any kind of, government funding for anything, like just the same reason he's opposed Medicaid expansion throughout his tenure as Assembly Speaker too. And he was so obviously dug in on this, and there was no indication that things were going to change,
Mhm.
because even as Snyder had been saying stuff like this over and over and over again throughout the session, he had a quote to Wisconsin Watch saying, like, if, I'm paraphrasing here, but like, it was, if we can't get this bill passed, I don't know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
There was rumblings that he was threatening not to run again, in his somewhat competitive district and all of that. And like, but it wasn't producing results. At the end of the day, it wasn't producing results. What actually produced results was Democrats going absolutely all out and tying these two bills to every other bill that was on the floor session calendar, and it forced them into caucus and forced them into a really bad publicity day. And
Right.
then they finally relented. And
Because what
even in that, like you said, the calculation of the 8 state representatives and the 8 most closely contested assembly seats out there talking about it, um, but it worked. The
Well,
gambit
because what
worked.
Democrats did, the Republicans who supported this the whole time said they supported it, but we never publicly saw them actually call Voss out, or like, Democrats have tried a couple other times to kind of cause a ruckus about this on the floor, and
Hmm.
they all just like sat there silent. They didn't do anything. So by pulling this move, they pretty much forced them like back into a corner and made it look incredibly awkward for them to not do anything. And they just and I'm assuming that's what all the hours and hours of caucus were that day. I'm sure they were like, I would love to be a fly on the wall, but I'm sure they were really
Hmm.
mad about that and trying to figure it out. And I don't even know at what point they actually had him like surrender and say, fine. I don't, because then they came back from the fundraiser. They went back into caucus. At that point, I actually walked by him in the hall again, and like, I didn't have anything to say at that point, but we just kinda, like, locked eyes, and it was, like, slow motion. But I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't even until later then that he finally was like, "Okay, just do
Hmm.
it." And it's notable that Voss himself was not at the press conference.
Hmm. Hmm. But getting his speech and all of that ready for the next day, I suppose.
True.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, so yeah, it was a really wild day, and I think it just goes to show that this is what happens when Democrats, like, yeah, push and take chances and don't give in and don't always play by the rules.
Mhm.
Because Republicans sure don't.
Mhm. And in the end, the end goal was healthcare for moms and breast cancer screening for women, and that's a huge victory for Wisconsin.
Yep.
And, um, you and so many other people have worked so hard to make calls and organize and really push on this issue, and I was just, going back through some of the stuff that I had written over the years about Voss. And just like there was a column that Kristen Bry wrote in like 2023 or 2024 about this issue too. Like, this is not just something that came up at the end of the session. It's something the Senate passed and something that, they couldn't get through the assembly. That type of stuff happens all the time.
Mhm.
Um, but it was really an example of just like the years that it took to get to that point too.
Yeah, and it is frustrating. I'm very glad it passed now, but we have stats that there's been about like 50 women a year dying in Wisconsin because they have lost access to care during this time period. And that's really frustrating because this was an urgent issue and we wasted so much time. And I don't know how many more women and moms we lost because of it. And the other thing is, like, yeah, he kept saying, I don't want to expand welfare. I don't want to expand welfare. It was a very, very small amount. And actually, the majority of it was paid for by the federal government, which is why 48 other states, including Texas, Kentucky, Florida, had already done this.
Hmm.
Because what I try to tell people is like, it's almost like if you have a corporate job and they have like a 401k and they're going to match it, if you just don't take that money. That's what this is. We're just
Hmm.
not taking federal money that's literally on the table because he didn't want to, even though they were picking up most of the bill.
Hmm.
And especially with all these Medicaid cuts, the fact that it was still like, it was ridiculous that he wouldn't. It was clear. It was just like, it didn't make any fiscal sense at all not to do this. It was just like his own thing. So,
And it didn't make political sense either, because more than what was the latest Marquette polling, like more than 65% of voters said that they supported this postpartum Medicaid extension, including, I believe, like a pretty split between Republicans and stuff on this too. And that just goes to something Voss has done over and over again. It's just these majority issues that end up with the gavel in, gavel out, end up
mhm.
not getting a committee hearing, end up getting buried in some obscure corner of the state legislature. And, I think there are a number of election bills where that's a case for, but there are also just like, you go up and down the list of policies that have had majority support that Voss has ignored and buried and obstructed and whatever else. And then he goes to give the speech saying that, I'm reflecting the will of the people. The legislature reflects the will of the people. It's just the compartmentalization that must take place there to believe that about yourself is just insane.
Yeah, like also, cannabis, marijuana,
Yeah,
we
sure.
don't have legal we don't even have medical marijuana here because he has been blocking that, but that is another thing that consistently polls very popular
Hmm.
among most people in Wisconsin. Do you think that's gonna finally get done? Or do you think that let's talk a little bit about because 'cause I'm assuming Tyler August is gonna take over for him. I don't really know much about him other than he's, like, always scowling, and I know he's Voss's kind of right-hand man.
Hmm.
What do you think is gonna
I
happen with
mean,
that?
yeah, he's been the majority leader there for several years, and I think he has been thought to be the kind of next speaker in waiting. Um, you know, not somebody I know a ton about on a personal level or anything like that, but from my understanding, from what I've heard, he's a little bit kind of more of a libertarian leaning
Hmm,
type of Republican than anything else. But I think he and Voss and like it's this kind of like ex-urban Racine County over to Whitewater. There's like a lot of really big Republican energy in that part of the state,
yeah,
and I think I would not think he'd be a departure that big of a departure from like the politics of Voss. But I think the biggest approach is just like he knows the assembly and he knows the state legislature inside and out.
mhm.
And he has, so often I ask myself when it comes to the Republican Party of this era, is it malevolence or incompetence that is driving their decision? It is often both. But
Mhm.
for Voss, it's always been malevolence.
Yeah.
He is not an incompetent person. He is not an unintelligent person. He is smart. He is conniving. He is, just kind of the master operator behind the scenes. Um, and I think losing that type of aspect that he knows exactly how to pull every lever of power that he needs to.
Yes.
And
That's
I
what's so
think
frustrating.
that's
Like,
the
idiots
aspect.
don't
And
get
he
this much
chooses to
hate.
use that power for evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason he's so low. That's because he's very good at what he does, or has been.
Yeah.
But
I asked Charles Franklin once about or the executive director of the Marquette
yeah.
poll, if there is any comparison to like the Voss numbers, like the favorability numbers that he sees, is their comparison to any other politician, because they poll like every state politician for those favorability numbers all the time. And he said, not really as far as the state politics, but the comparison he actually made with Voss was to Nancy Pelosi, and because she's this reviled figure on the right, but
Mhm.
she was so successful in knowing where all the votes were going to be counted and knowing how to get legislation over the finish line, and in that same aspect, kind of understanding how to use the levers of power within the legislative branch to
Mhm.
accomplish certain goals. Um, so I thought that was kind of a really interesting comparison, and I think about you know Democrats now after Pelosi leaves, or Republicans after Mitch McConnell leaves on a national scale. That's the type of politician I think that Voss is and has been in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I think I do think that comparison kinda makes sense, and that's kinda what I was getting at with, like, do you think Republicans are gonna be sorry that they, like, gave him so much shit at so many times? And I see a lot of that on the left too, of a lot of, and obviously Pelosi got a lot of hate from a lot of, very liberal, progressive
Sure.
people, because
Yeah.
a lot of people don't ever want politicians to capitulate or, actually work across the aisle. But the reality is that, like, when you are in leadership positions in divided government, you have to do that. Um, to a certain extent, now I do think times are changing a little bit, and with like social media and more people paying attention, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And I think ultimately that's kind of part of what happened to Voss too. Way more people are paying attention. Way more calls are being driven. They are being like blasted all the time. People are not giving up, and I think he's maybe not made for a modern media reality with politics where everybody knows what's going on, and like all the cooks are in the kitchen. And so it's going to be interesting to see if Tyler August kind of shifts that strategy at all, or what he decides to do, because everybody's kind of watching now.
And if he becomes speaker, like, that seems to be the expectation, but you never know. I mean, things can be unpredictable. We don't know exactly how this is
That's
all
true,
going to
because
play
they still
out.
have to be voted in, right? So
Right.
he has to have the votes, and there seem to be a lot of different ideas of
Yeah.
what people want. And speaking of, only one person, Voss ended up, when they took the vote, voting yes on postpartum Medicaid,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, what do you think about that?
It just goes to show that he's a political creature at the
Yeah,
end of the day all the time.
yeah, classic. But the one person who voted no is
Shay Sortwell? Is that who it was?
the
Yeah.
worst. Yeah.
Yeah, in a pretty safe red district in northeastern Wisconsin. Um, he's got a pretty checkered history of his own.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, there's articles with quotes from police officers. He was brutally abusing his children and told the police officers that the Bible told him it was fine. And this is a man who Voss has been supporting. So
mhm,
that's the that's the GOP in Wisconsin, I guess.
it is. It is. It's
But yeah,
shameful
I think
stuff.
there may be some fights for speakership, almost like how we've seen go down at the federal level. So it'll be interesting to watch that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think too, like, I think the real fitting end for this, because this is, I do think, I've seen a lot of people say this in the wake of Voss's announcement, is that he's doing this with a eye on the shifting political winds in going into the midterm elections, and the fact that they have the first fully post gerrymander election. Like,
Yeah.
he maybe is not, he has been in a position through more than a decade of gerrymandered maps, and yes, he deserves credit for keeping the assembly last time, but this is the first realistic opportunity for the Senate to flip too. And if Democrats are able to flip the Senate and flip the assembly, I don't think he's built to be in the minority party, right? He's
No.
not he's not going to be that type of leader. And so, it makes sense. He was incredibly safe to go out at this moment.
Yeah, it's like quitting before you get fired, you know?
Yeah. Yep. And I think the fitting end to all of this would be to see Republicans lose the assembly this fall, and for Robin Voss to have to hand the gavel to Greta Neubauer in January. That's the ending of this story that I want to see.
Who also just made a big announcement this week.
Congrats to Greta. Yeah,
Yeah, she's having a baby, which,
that's right.
made this all even, like, more impactful for her, and so I'm not sure what her, like, schedule is like, but yeah, she's
Right.
really done an amazing job. Also, kinda just on the quieter side behind the scenes, but getting loud when she needs to, and, she
Hmm.
killed it this week. Absolutely
Yeah.
killed it.
Yeah.
So
A week that started with Tony Evers' final State of the State speech. We see Robin Voss's retirement. This is really the end of an era in Wisconsin politics. This was something I was talking about earlier in the week in a podcast with Angela Lang, and I was on Rational Revolution with Mark Becker last weekend too. And we were talking about just there's kind of this like last dance vibes to what was going on in state politics because Republicans are rushing to meet their imaginary deadline
yeah.
to so that they can finish up their session and go back to campaign and fundraise for the next nine and take their 9 month break from legislating. And then it's Tony Evers' final State of the State. He introduced a number of priorities, but this Evers Voss dynamic has been what's dominated our politics for the past 8 years, and that is coming to an end now.
Mhm.
And we're kind of entering the great unknown for this wild Democratic primary that we're going to be talking about from now until August, and the midterm elections. From there. And how this is all going to take shape. But this is this. I think Tony Evers even said it in the press release that he put out yesterday about Voss as well. Was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. I'm losing all sense of time. I was up late writing last night.
Mhm.
Column soon to come with the recombobulation area, but it is really it's really the end of something here.
It is. It is. So I know we say this every election in Wisconsin is, like, the most important election. This is gonna be so important, but also really fucking fun, I think. There's gonna be a
Yeah.
lot of stuff to watch, so I'm excited.
I'm excited too, and I'm excited for the debate that's going to be had in the Democratic primary. I'm excited to see which candidates are going to be running in some of these state legislative races. There's going to be a lot for us to talk about, and yet I think the 2026 election in Wisconsin is going to be the most consequential one since 2010. And 2010, we took how long did it take this state to get out from under that election in
Well,
2010?
16 years, right?
Yeah, and we're here now, um, and so to all of the state supreme court races that have unraveled that, Tony Evers' victories that have unraveled that, Josh Call's victories that have unraveled that, and then now kind of getting a real opportunity to make a real change in Wisconsin.
Yeah, we're at that it's like the classic little by little and then all at once, and we are at
Yeah,
that moment,
we're
and
at the all at once moment.
yep,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay, well, Dan, this has been fun. Thank you for chatting, and I hope you get some rest this weekend.
You too. You too.
Alright, bye.
Thank you.